us today. Today's webinar is on performance management for talent acquisition teams. I'm joined by a number of incredible panelists. I'll introduce them shortly, and we'll have a great discussion after that. But before we get into those introductions, I did want to take care of a few housekeeping normal notes here at the beginning of the session. First, we are recording. You will receive a copy of the recording, so if you need to head out a little bit early or if an emergency pops up, don't worry, you'll get an email shortly after the event with a link to the recording. You'll be able to miss or watch anything you miss and send it out to friends and coworkers and all that good stuff. So don't worry about that. Second up, we have the chat window open. Feel free to interact with each other throughout the event. But if you have questions for the panelists specifically, please use the Q&A box. My colleague Chris is kind of in the background here watching the chat and the Q&A to make sure we're getting the stuff we need to talk about. He'll be filtering that over to me throughout the session. So again, please use the Q&A feature here in Zoom if you have questions for the panelists. Generally speaking, I'm going to save those questions to the end, but if there's something that comes up and we need to clarify or dig deeper into a topic, Chris will interrupt us and we'll, or he'll interrupt me, he'll get the question over to me and we will go from there. So with that, let's get into the introductions. My name is Nancy Wood. I am the VP of People here at Flawless. We are an industry agnostic people as a service solution for companies that need talent acquisition support, whether it's filling short-term gaps on your team or providing long-term end-to-end strategic support. Our on-demand embedded recruiters use talent mapping strategies and high-touch recruiting to help our clients meet their hiring goals, improve hiring practices, and just generally create a great experience for our clients and the candidates we work with. As a people-first organization, one of our goals is always to just build community in the talent acquisition space. And so our webinars like this one and some of our public workshops are intended to do just that, build the community with the broader industry. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for all being here and being part of our community. I'm joined by some amazing panelists. First up, I have Camille. She's in the top left of my corner. I'm not sure which corner she's in for you, but Camille is the head of talent at Strava, the largest platform for athletes of all levels with over 30 types of athletic activities and 100 million users. Camille is using her 17 plus years of HR experience to build diverse teams at Strava with foundational trend-setting practices that attract and retain talent. She's also the co-host of a popular podcast with another HR professional, her twin sister. The podcast, The Career Salon with the HR Twins, ranked in the top 5% globally on Listen Notes and can be found on any platform. Welcome, Camille.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are glad to have you. Next up, we have Jennifer Hash. Jennifer is the VP of Global Recruiting at Rippling, an all-in-one HR and IT platform, rated the #1 solution for workforce management on G2 among many well-known competitors. Coming from Intuit and Uber, Jennifer is now leading Rippling's growing team of professionals around the world to create streamlined, positive hiring experiences for competitive edge in a demanding market. Around this time last year, she also participated in a webinar with our very own Nikki Russell on recruiting recruiters. So it's good to have you kind of in that community with us again, year over year. So welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And finally, we have Kent Button. Kent is the VP of Global Talent at VMware. VMware is a cloud computing company headquartered in the Bay Area that enables businesses to utilize cloud services for more than just storage, including building apps, infrastructure, security, and more. Kent builds, coaches, and leads VMware's global talent acquisition teams in creating revolutionary recruiting and employee programs to find and retain today's top talent. Welcome, Kent.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Great to be here. Welcome, everyone.
Amazing. Great to have all of you here. As we get started into the conversation, one of the things I like to do is kind of just set the stage or kind of create a bit of a framework. And one thing I know is that the term performance management can mean a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to. I think sometimes employees hear performance management and their brain automatically goes to that negative performance improvement plans and a scary space. And so I want to start, like I said, kind of with this framing of what is performance management? What does it mean to you when you think of that term? How do you interpret it as a leader and as a manager of some hopefully incredible ICs? Kent, would you like to go first, maybe?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. I think when I think of performance management, for me, it really starts with having clearly defined goals or OKRs or KPIs, whatever they are within your organization. I think it really starts with having a good understanding of what good looks like and making sure that those goals are aligned with the company's priorities. I think from there, once those have been established, the performance management is really clearly articulating what those goals are and tracking them, at the recruiter level to make sure that they're keeping on track, or if there needs to be course correction, that there's really good coaching that is happening with that.
Amazing. Yes. Camille, would you add anything?
Sure. I love that answer, Kent. I am of a different school of thought when it comes to performance management. Performance management to me is management of your performance, not me managing your performance. And so in my mind, yes, as a leader, a talent leader, to provide like what are the needs of the business, what are the objectives of the business, cascading my vision to the team, but then giving that to you as a mature adult, employee, teammate, recruiter, to figure out how you're going to work your way through success and being a high performer. So definitely, in my mind, performance management is something that is necessary, but it's not necessarily something that I own. I empower the people on my team to own their own performance and to be successful as a group and also individually.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I think it's an important thing to think about. Who is responsible for performance? Again, when I mentioned at the beginning, oftentimes people think of performance improvement plans and the negatives. And that, I think, school of thought is one where my performance is somebody else's responsibility. And it's really great to hear that that isn't the case. The responsibility does lie with the individual. And we as managers are just there to help support and create a framework with clear expectations, like Kent said, to make sure that they can manage their own performance.
Exactly.
Jennifer, what are your thoughts? What would you maybe add to this?
When I think of performance management, the first thing I think of is building high performing teams. One of Rippling's leadership principles is building winning teams. And performance management is a subset of that. So it just fits into the form of building winning. Sometimes it's around improving the performance. Sometimes it's maintaining. Sometimes it's pushing the limits of possibility in the performance. But I think it just goes hand in hand with building a high performing team.
I love that. I love that. Amazing. Okay. So I think to be able to manage something, one of the first things people need to be able to do is understand a thing. And so I think that's where a lot of times when we talk about performance management, we're talking about things like hard metrics or specific data points or I don't know, any other number of things, maybe things that are tangible instead of intangible. And so I'm curious, what do you all track, measure? What are the things that you try to understand when you are then trying to help someone manage their performance? Would anyone like to go first?
Sure.
Perfect.
And I'll give everybody a little bit of context. It does matter what company you are. I come from very operational companies. And so Uber is known for how they operate, how they build operational plans and playbooks, and that includes recruiting. Rippling is of the same ilk. And part of the reason why I was, attracted to the company as well. And so we look, and it depends on the stage of your recruiting team. When you're forming, storming, and norming, your KPIs have to look different versus where they can be in a more mature recruiting organization. So the journey Rippling's on right now is we just really started with some simple KPIs about a year plus ago. And that was offer accepts for recruiting, offer acceptance rate, and conversion metrics. This is not only just to manage their performance, but actually help them understand what's working. How many recruiter phone screens do I need to do a week to even get to a X goal? And so this is just really to kind of level the playing field. People know where they stand. They know what they need to hit. And then there's a little bit of, when you're scaling a recruiting team, there needs to be a little bit of bespoke. Like you might have a recruiter that is the first time executive recruiter, which happened here. We can't like clearly just say it has to be this. We have to kind of grow with that metric, if you will, as a company. And sourcing, we look at the same metrics. We try to keep them very similar so there isn't this big disparity between recruiting and sourcing, but maybe we'll look at more of the top of the funnel because they don't have as much impact on the anything after onsite, for example. Adding on to that, so we first started with just like, how do we do our job? Then you added in the hiring manager sat, then you added in the candidate satisfaction. And I'm sure we'll add in more. You know, at Uber, we got really sophisticated. We had a primary metric and a secondary metric, but that's where we started really, was kind of your basics and then adding on to there. And we wanted to make sure we could actually measure some of these things. So that was also important too. Nothing more frustrating to a recruiting team is if you have a metric that you're kind of wonky and you're measuring. So we were careful to keep it simple to start.
Yeah, that's an important part. I've seen some recruiting teams really kind of overcomplicate the metrics. Sometimes they're really trying to understand nitty-gritty stuff that's happening. And sometimes those are things that are outside of the control of recruiting. And so is it really telling you the story or giving you the insight that you need into what's going on in your team? So
And,
that message of keep it simple.
Yeah. What is the business ready for? We weren't ready for some of the metrics we could measure at Intuit because we're much earlier in our stage business as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just said, Jennifer, rings true for us as well within VMware. I think that, you know, we certainly look at areas like, you know, hiring manager satisfaction, candidate satisfaction, NPS. We look at areas like time to fill, certainly hires and productivity. So I think it's generally a mix of, you know, measurable and you know, quantitative goals, but also qualitative as well. You know, we get feedback from, you know, key stakeholders, for instance. At VMware, my team have goals around their own personal development, what they're doing to grow their skills and grow their knowledge, and you know, areas like that as well. So, you know, it's a blend of things that we can certainly measure. We can run a report, we can see different metrics on one hand, but there's also, you know, some of the qualitative, you know, anecdotal that we have to get as well. And between the two of those, it kind of paints a complete picture.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ken, is there how do you weight those kind of two things compared to one another, the qualitative and the quantitative?
I mean, we don't necessarily put a weight on it, meaning that, you know, if you're going to have a performance review, this is weighted at 60% and this is at 10%. I've certainly worked within organizations that have assigned weights to that. Again, I think that we take it as a holistic view, right? In totality, when you're looking at, you know, all of that, what kind of a, you know, picture does that paint? I mean, certainly if we look at TA through the lens of the organization and through the businesses that we support, you know, we always try to take a, you know, customer first, customer centric view and say, you know, what's important to our business is bringing in quality, diverse talent in a timely manner. So I think for us, we always kind of orient towards what's that biggest impact for the business. And then secondary to that, within the TA organization, it's what kind of a team do we need to be able to execute on that? What kind of skills do we need? What kind of talent? What kind of you know, goals do we need to have in place in order to facilitate that, you know, bringing in of quality talent quickly?
Great. Now, Camille, I know you might have a slightly different feeling or opinion on this one, so I'm gonna turn it over to you. But yeah, again, just when you're trying to understand how your team is performing, what is it that you're looking at?
I'm looking at high performance. So I do agree with Jennifer. And also I agree that it depends on the company, right? I work at a later stage startup. I don't work at like this huge mammoth of the company where you have 500 recruiters, right? I've actually never measured any of the talent teams that I've managed by metrics. I don't like to be managed by metrics. For me, in building a talent team, it's can you be an adult and do your best? And that's how I like to be managed, because once you give me something, I'm going to go for it full throttle. And I look for that from my team, above and beyond just the regular metrics. And one of the reasons why metrics is a low thing for me is because it's so many variables involved as talent. It's talent professionals who work with variables. If your manager goes on vacation for 3 weeks and you're working on his or her rec, right? That's gonna interrupt your metric. For example, when I started in recruiting, my brother and my sister passed away 6 months apart. I was killing it out the gate. In my role, I was doing so well. And then I had this tragedy happen in my life. Does that mean that I have poor performance or I'm not a high performer? No, that doesn't mean that. And I was so just amazed at my manager, how they had care and concern for me. So I always vowed to be people first over processes or metrics, and be a people leader first instead of hammering someone over the head with metrics. Now, metrics are important to inform decision making and what direction you go in terms of how you're performing as a team, how you're meeting the business needs. But for me, I want my team to be motivated outside of metrics. It shouldn't take me giving you metrics to be successful, to really build relationships with people, with organizations, doing outreach, mentorship, managing projects. For my team, it's really, if you're recruiting and you do a good job, hooray, that's your job, right? It's what have you done outside of that to really make an impact. So for me, it's really impact versus numbers, because so many different things can go into disturbing that metric for a person. And also, in most cases, we don't hold our leaders and our hiring managers or teams to those same metrics. And they are half of, the relationship, since it's a partnership and we're not pizza delivery drivers and we don't just deliver candidates. It's a partnership between hiring managers and talent professionals. So if there's partnership there, if we're being measured on something, our managers, our hiring teams should be measured on those same things because they heavily impact those metrics. And so I come from the school of thought just to really lead the person. And I think that the results will come. I mean, my team at Strava is amazing, and I've never given them a metric in terms of diversity, in terms of building relationships outside of Strava, being a talent partner to our hiring managers and teams. And most, organizations, talent doesn't have a really good rep. And I would say that building relationships and putting more of a focus on that internally and externally really makes a difference. So.
Yeah, you've made some really good points in there. One of them that I wanted to call out was, from what I'm hearing from all of you is that metrics are kind of like an informational piece, right? It's the start of a conversation. It can inform, but it's never the whole story. And one of the examples you gave in there reminded me of, seems like every team I've worked on has always had one force multiplier on the team, that one person who maybe on paper doesn't look like the best recruiter or doesn't look like the highest performer, but the way they interact with their coworkers, with people that they're mentoring and kind of bringing along, just as an organization, their impact is so big. And I'm curious, if I'm the only one that's experienced those people on the team, or how you all have seen or interacted with those force multipliers and how you kind of work with them to multiply that even more. Does anyone have someone that comes to mind with that? Profile?
Nancy, just to clarify, a force multiplier, like in this scenario, do you mean somebody who's in a recruiter role, for example, and they're doing a lot of great things but they're just not getting the results?
I'm thinking of an example. There's a recruiter I've worked with in the past who, when we would look at their specific offer accepts, it might be 80% a goal, good, but not quite there. But when you talk to the 4 recruiters that sit closest to them, they say, I wouldn't have been able to close this candidate without so-and-so coaching me on the back end and without coaching me on the back end. So the impact they're making for the company is much bigger than what their individual metrics show. And so I guess that was really just mentioned as a way to kind of illustrate this idea that numbers are the start of a conversation, but there's often these other pieces here too. So
Yep. Yeah, that's like a go and see moment. So usually when I see something like that, I will call it's actually, I'm such a rippling representative today. It's actually a rippling principle, the leadership principle, go and see. So if you're you're almost suspect, like this person's doing all the right things and there's something, the results aren't showing, this isn't representing their work. So I would go and see in that scenario. And this is what we do at Rippling. I observe the debriefs. I almost guarantee you're going to find something there, maybe attributed to the recruiter a little bit, but probably the business, probably calibration on the role, probably, and so the coaching opportunity if it's a recruiter there is, hey, did you notice this? Did you raise this flag? So to Camille's point, owning your own performance, part of that is seeing like something's not clicking here. And then if those things don't change the format, then you look and we have a tool called Bright Hire where I can actually observe people extending offers, having the recruiter phone screen. It took a minute for the team to get used to it. Now they love it. Now they say, hey, did you look at my Bright Hire? Would you tell me what do you think? And that just to uncover what might be stopping this person from having the success that they deserve. So I just use this concept called go and see and just 5 it and troubleshoot it from there. To your point, Nancy, you don't want to lose people like that because that's like morale for the team. But at the same time, you have a business to run and you want to kind of understand what's going to get them over the line.
Yeah, that's so great. I love the go and see and the 5 whys. I feel like 5 whys applies in almost every situation, performance management or otherwise. Camille, I wanted to go back to what you were mentioning before, because one thing you said that also stuck out to me was this idea of the partnership between talent acquisition and your hiring managers or the business, and how oftentimes the TA team has goals or metrics or specific things that they're working towards, but their partners might not. And that just made me realize, yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen a hiring manager with a specific goal or interviewers with a specific goal. And so I'm curious if any of you have ever worked anywhere that measures the performance of the other side of the recruiting equation outside of the talent acquisition team.
I have not specifically, but I've said a few times that I would love to see that, just like hiring managers fill out a survey on their recruiting experience. I would love for us to be able to do that on the hiring managers as well. Never quite gotten there yet. I do think that it's important, even in the absence of goals, I think it's important at that time you're doing the intake or the rec kickoff meeting with that manager to set expectations, to really have a defined SLA, even defining what that partnership looks like. So for instance, when the recruiter is presenting candidates to the hiring manager, there's an expectation, there's an agreement as to when that hiring manager is going to get back to us with feedback or, with their interest. So I think, kind of setting the stage, setting that up for success at the beginning is critically important, to have that partnership and understanding of what those roles look like and what the expectations are on both sides.
That's great. Camille, were you going to add something too? Yeah.
No, I've never seen that before. But I think it's important to always tell my team, we do have a very comprehensive, new position kickoff. You have to have all your ducks in a row before we start recruiting on your position. You have to have this conversation, and we have to be in lockstep together to actually have success or a good outcome. So it's super important to have that partnership. I also tell my team to push back, and hold hiring managers and hiring teams accountable. This is the person that they're going to be adding to their team. And so Strava, we have an anti-racism commitment. We're committed to DEI. This is something that we ingrain in our process. And so we encourage, those questions in the interview process and things like that. So encouraging my team to push back and guide the hiring manager along in that process is super important. And so I really think that having accountability steps built into your process is just super helpful to have great outcomes when it comes to delivering the right candidate.
Yeah.
We don't have metrics yet, but we have done a few things. So one of the things is leadership roles. We have recruiters on the panel. And so when we're bringing in those leadership hires, we are assessing their ability to partner with recruiting, the accountability they take in recruiting. I usually go through like, how did you build your team, and really assess, did they source? Did they help close? How hands-on were they? Did they take the accountability of those roles versus just delegating? So it's super important leadership principle at Rippling. The second thing we do is we have recruiting principles, and one of them is everyone recruits. So we train everybody on recruiting, hiring monthly. And I spend a good 5 minutes going through these 3 principles and explaining to them that this is a team sport. Recruiting is the functional expert, but by no means do you delegate your sourcing and your candidate closing to recruiting. It's a team sport. We need you in there with us. So the expectations are there. And then on the leveling rubric and the competencies for engineering specifically, we have recruiting in there and the expectations. So even starting with your more junior engineers, like you need to become very efficient at assessment, and it's an expectation of your role. So that's how we build it in. I would love to get to the numbers too. And I think that it's possible someday, but we're not there yet. We do show a report that shows team and VP offer acceptance rate.
Okay. Interesting. I really like your first point there. And I was kind of watching the chat window, and I think a lot of people had this same moment of when you are hiring for those leaderships positions at your company. We all know that most managers are ultimately held responsible and accountable to having a high performing team, and that hiring for their team is one of their core responsibilities. And so we should be assessing them for their ability to hire in the hiring process. So I can imagine there's going to be at least a half dozen people that go back to their companies today and say,
do it,
fix this.
Yes. Yes.
I love that.
I picked up on another thing that you mentioned earlier, Camille, about, recruiters not being the sole decision makers, and that it can be difficult to have a performance metric in place for a recruiter when they don't own the hiring decision. And that's so true. We had talked about, measuring recruiters on things like time to fill or diversity, or, even, NPS or satisfaction. And in all those metrics, it's so hard to hold a recruiter solely accountable when they don't own the decisions on that. So that's something that we've certainly grappled with as well. How do we drive time to fill, knowing that we only own a portion of that as well? So for instance, with hiring manager or candidate NPS, the surveys that we choose to send out within VMware measure everything start to finish. Like, how easy was it for that candidate to apply? How, the quality of the feedback, the, timeliness of the decision. So recruiters own, pieces and parts of that. So while, some of us may be on the hook for delivering that, I think when you're measuring the recruiters at that level, you should concentrate on the pieces that they directly impact, right? So if you're measuring a candidate experience, you can ask them how well the recruiter knew, the job, the requirements of the position. Did they follow through on their commitments in terms of turnaround time or expectation setting, things like that. So, I think it's easy to, put a metric to have a certain amount of, NPS score or something else, but it's not until you really start peeling that back and looking at those pieces that the recruiters or the sourcers, depending on the role, can really directly impact. That's important piece of it.
I totally agree, Kent. And something that you mentioned also, as far as like the time to fill metric, that's one I struggle with because I feel like it's the antithesis of building diverse teams, because people are more connected to the number versus the mission or the purpose of building a diverse team. And something that we do at Strava, our process might take slower. It might be slower, but we're building relationships with people. We're not going to different events or going to different HBCU campuses and cherry picking all the Black people, or going to an organization or an outreach and cherry picking all the women. It's really like focusing on building those relationships over a number, right? And my first year at Strava, we went out the gate and we hired almost 200 people and almost doubled our diversity metrics. And that's without any metrics attached to my recruiters. That's just us building relationships and fostering a community for recruiting in our organization. So it's really important that when we think about metrics like time to fill or diversity, things like that, that we don't do more harm than good.
Yeah. Yeah, as we were thinking about, or as I continued to think about what metrics have I seen hiring managers or interviewers maybe be assigned, the two that came to mind was most hiring managers have that, like, I need this role filled by X date. Usually if they're trying to add headcount, it's to build a thing or do a thing and hit a business goal. And so they have that deadline in mind. And as we were talking about partnership and that kind of thing, it did remind me that so much of this is the educational piece, right? Your hiring managers don't know that the interview process end to end is 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. And so your job as that recruiter and that partner to your hiring manager is to help inform them, educate them. This is what our process looks like. This is roughly how long it takes. These are the types of bottlenecks we traditionally run into. And here's what you can do to make sure we don't run into those same bottlenecks this time around. The other number I do see sometimes measured is that interviewer. I don't know if it's effectiveness or pass-through rate, but I think we've all had one interviewer on panels that just says yes to everybody. And like, that's not helpful. You want your interviewers actually screening people out. And so that might be a metric if you're trying to think of who your partners are. That might be one thing to kind of keep track of. Do any of you do that piece? Have you seen any good, bad, or ugly in the tracking your interviewers' effectiveness? No?
It's hard to track.
Yeah.
I think that's Kent. I'm sorry if you were gonna, I can wait. You were gonna, it's just, we just haven't, I haven't been in a company where we've nailed that yet. I think it would be fantastic to be able to see that whole story from outreach to the first 2 years in the job, if you will, or something like that, but we just haven't been able to do that yet.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the good and the bad, but I've seen the ugly, and it gets really ugly really quickly. At past organizations, having lists where we would grade the interviewers and the quality of it, and it goes off the rail quickly. So we'd love some best practices there if anyone has them.
Yeah. We are doing a very ad hoc approach right now. Again, we use this tool called BrightHire. And so for those who haven't used BrightHire, it's like Gong has this tool for more like sales. BrightHire is more for interviews. And there's two ways that this is a bit ad hoc right now, so it doesn't scale, but we have a candidate experience Slack channel. And that candidate experience, the CTO is super bought in. And so anytime our interviewer is late, so let me zoom out. We look at all the comments on our CSAT. And one of the things that we can control is your camera's on during the interview and you're on freaking time. Come on, and that makes candidates nervous. It's a bad experience. And so if we can just take those easies that we can control and really dig into those, that's step one for interview effectiveness. So we created this Slack channel. And so we are direct at Rippling. So we put people in that Slack channel, like, you were 10 minutes late. What's up? I go back and I side Slack them like, hey, is there any Wi-Fi issues, anything I can help you with? And if interviewers aren't behaving, we take them out. And it's just, these candidates, give up their time, they're nervous. And the last thing we need to do is just be on a dark screen. Or one candidate saw Reddit, an interviewer was looking at Reddit and they saw the reflection in the glasses, like, hell no. Like, we are, you are out. And so we try to get the bad apples out. I don't think anybody comes to this, to an interview with bad intent, but they have to quickly understand you cannot operate this way. Maybe you don't need to be an interviewer. And then, so that's one. And that just helps us keep just the controllable stuff really quickly. And then we have a recruiting marshal program, which is like a bar raiser. And that's just getting on its legs. And that is, they observe, they will try to shadow interviews, especially for newer interviewers, again, to just keep things from going off the rails. But, that overall effectiveness, we're not there yet.
Yeah, those are some really great points. And I feel like we've kind of been on this topic for a little while now, but I do think it's important because we kind of previewed it earlier in the conversation. When you think about a recruiter's performance, so much of what their performance looks like is outside of their control, right? It is these other factors. And so doing things like, seeking understanding, asking 5 whys, like going through all of those to really understand what's going on, and then potentially having these other metrics to look at to understand the full picture is important. The next topic that is a little related that I wanted to get to is that I think we can all probably agree that recruiting as a profession is one that just naturally has really high highs and some really low lows. Every recruiter has been on a hot streak, and then every recruiter finds themselves in this just rut and they don't know why and they can't figure it out. And so I'm curious what you all do to understand if someone is just in a rut or if they're truly underperforming and something needs to be done about it. Any ideas?
I mean, this goes back to relationships that you have with your recruiters. Like, that's why people manage first so that you can have that dialogue with the recruiters. Because like you said, there's ebbs and flows. Sometimes, I have I always throw it back, ask open-ended questions to the recruiter, but I always ask them if this situation, whether you're down for a little bit or you had a longer lag, if this was an interview question, how would you answer it? Yeah. So if this situation right now, if you're in an interview and someone asks you, have you ever had a challenging time during your work? How did you get out of it? So tell me how you will walk your way through explaining that to the interviewer. We're recruiters, right? We should be able to adequately walk through the steps. So I try to challenge them to answer and find a solution for the space that they're in. And it's this holding space for them to figure it out. I think that's how you challenge people to lead. And then it's also, you challenge people to regain self-motivation because, I can only manage individuals to an extent. You really need to have self-motivation because recruiting can be tiring, exhausting. We're on the phone all day. We have to be this joyous person representing the company. So it's not something that I feel like I can pull someone all the way out of. They have to figure their way through it. And then we can have that conversation a time or two, work out a plan to where they can get to where they need to be. But if not, be real with them. And I've had to have those tough conversations. Hey, I understand this is going on. I'm a very empathetic person and things like that. We need a plan, to walk you through and get you back to where you need to be. What happens if we get to a certain point, and we're supposed to be a high performing team meeting the needs of the business. And if we're not, then, the responsibility is on me. So I need you to, really work your way through this and look at it like an interview question and find the solution.
I like that.
Yeah, I'd agree. If it's a recruiter that you've been working with for a period of time, you need to look at the entire body of work, right? Is this a one-off anomaly? They're generally a strong performer in the past and they're, in a lull or in a rut. I think from there, it's just the beginning of the conversation. I think you need to look into it further and understand, is it a capability issue? Is it a motivation issue? Do they have something going on in their life that is impacting their ability? And the only way to do that is to sit down and have a conversation with them and, really understand what it is. And, look for their level of engagement. Are they asking for help? Are they offering help when they have bandwidth? So I think there's a lot more to it. When you do see a drop off in the results, really digging into it and understanding what the underlying causes are and doing what you can to get them back on track.
Yeah, I agree. I love it, Camille and Kent. There's been times where our teams had a slump. And it's heartbreaking to see as a leader, because everybody's, and it's like this kind of like, you cannot let them see you sweat, because you got to keep them, you got to be real, but you got to keep them motivated. And we had this big shift this summer in the level of people we were hiring. We were all of a sudden, the business, as it does, made an abrupt shift. This team was not equipped. They were crushing it in a certain level, and this new expectation was much. So I did a boot camp, and I just said, okay, everyone is going to be able to do this, even though maybe in my heart, I knew not everyone was going to be able to do it, but I was going to try to build a boot camp that we're going to give everybody the opportunity, whether they can step up, TBD. And so we just approached it as a team performance strategy versus really singling out people at that moment, because it would have crushed them. And we didn't need to do that. The industry is already in a tough place for recruiting right now. We didn't need to make it tougher. Long story short, TLDR, if you're seeing placed in the team where more than one person is struggling, you might have an opportunity to just build in a development plan or a quick training or boot camp and see if everybody can kind of come up and lift that person with you or those people with you.
I love that. And I like that idea too of sometimes you just have to start with a clean slate. Great, the past is the past. This is what our expectation was there. The future is the future. We've got a different expectation and we have to work towards that. So let's clean slate. And I think one of the things that I was sort of hearing between some of the messages was also that sometimes it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you're like, well, I'm doing bad and now I am bad. And then, the slump just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so having a leader that can come in and say, I don't know what's going on with you right now. This isn't normal. Clean slate. Tomorrow, new, fresh day. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to handle this? How are we going to move forward? So yeah, I think it's good when there are great recruiting leaders out there that can understand that momentary lulls in performance are not necessarily indicative of someone being an underperformer, but instead sometimes just these things that we have to work through. We've got about 15 minutes left on the clock here. And so I'm going to pop over to some of the questions. Some of these we might have answered a little bit as we went along, but I'll call them out more specifically. And one of the first ones here is, what do you do to ensure there's alignment on goals between the recruiters and the hiring managers, the sourcers and the hiring managers? How do you ensure alignment and then have that shared accountability with them? I feel like I've got a script that you use with hiring managers when you're like, all right, we've got to have the let's get real talk. Are you willing to risk your project deadline by not hiring someone right now because you want somebody who hits 100% of your criteria instead of somebody who hits 95% of your criteria? Sometimes there are those moments and you have that script, but what do you all do to ensure alignment so that there's accountability for your partners as well?
I mean, it's a part of being a partner where I always tell my team, like, we're the talent professionals, right? We're the talent partners. I know hiring managers think they know everything about their jobs and our jobs, but that's actually not true. It is our job to educate and lead and really, lean into that partnership with them. So I always, and also I still recruit as well. So I'm always leaning into educating them on, especially these arbitrary requirements for this super special person that they're trying to hire, and to actually think about the competencies and really the outcomes they're looking for, so that we're able to hire the right person. And, I think everybody wants to hire a person that has 100%. They check off all the boxes, but that's not realistic. And also, that's not respecting a diverse pipeline of candidates, because everybody is different. And it's also our jobs to meet with people that may not have everything, have the conversation with them, really build that connection and pull those things out and be able to present that to the hiring manager, say, hey, this person has this, this, and this. These are some of the projects or the scenarios that they've been involved with. This is the impact that they've had, and really, move them away from perfection, because that doesn't exist. So it's really our jobs to kind of, everywhere we can, to put in that line of accountability, especially when you're trying to build diverse teams and all of that, because everything's not going to be perfect. I've seen hiring managers that they have to have what they have to have, and then 12 to 18 months later, that person turns over, and it's happened several times. And then when they really break down and say, oh, I can be flexible on this, then you find a rock star, right? So lean into the underdog. And that's our jobs as recruiters, to be advocates. And so really advocating, and also pushing in that accountability and pushing that. That's hard for recruiters, right? Because you want to have a good relationship with the hiring manager and the hiring teams. You want them to like you, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and you have to do your job, and you'll be doing yourself a disservice to lean into everything that the hiring manager wants, because they know their job, but they don't know yours. And so you have to work it that way and put in those accountability measures at every step of the process, and ask them the hard questions, the open-ended questions, and have them have that dialogue with you.
It's a great point.
Spot on. Yeah, I think there really is that conversation with a hiring manager, and an understanding of what are the absolute must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves, and knowing the difference between those. I think if you were to sit down and just ask a hiring manager, what are they looking for, they're going to give you a long laundry list of what the perfect candidate looks like for them that doesn't exist in the market. So I think really, trying to peel the onion and understand, okay, what is important? What are you really looking for? What's nice to have? What experience and skills need to walk in the door, and then what can you train for? That's incredibly important, as well as you're trying to build a diverse pipeline and a diverse organization, is really understanding that, okay, so if I bring candidates to the door with these 5 things, you will hire them, right? And just having a clear expectation as to what good looks like, and when the hiring manager wants the sun, moon, and stars, really questioning that, pushing back on that, really trying to understand why.
Yeah.
Purposeful.
Let's do a quick lightning round. One of the questions that came in, I think we can do a lightning round on, which is just real quick, one answer. The question is, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, basically, what's your favorite metric? Like, what is the one metric maybe to rule them all for you? What is that? What metric do you rely on the most or find the most important?
For me, it's candidate experience. I think good, bad, whatever the outcome is, I want that candidate to have a great experience and to be telling their friends on social media what their experience was. So
is that in like your CSAT? I don't know if you would call it CSAT or if you call it
candidate NPS, the Net Promoter Score. Yeah.
Cool. Camille, Jen, do you agree with that, or would you?
I agree with Kent, because we're only as good as the candidates who experience us. And candidates have great feedback. So we do a candidate experience survey when people make it to the in-person virtual loop, and they give us great feedback, and I use it to give feedback. And I'm actually having a conversation next week with some of my managers, pulling feedback for their org from some of the candidates, how they've been experiencing the managers, the types of questions we ask. Is this an inclusive process? You can learn so much about your organization from candidates, and how they feel, how they've been connected to the organization through the interview process. So I totally 100% agree with Kent.
Great. And Jennifer?
I'm going to have to say my conversion metrics, because I wanted to say hires to goal, but conversion metrics, you just can diagnose so much if you know how something's converting. That could be an offer acceptance rate, that could be on-site to offer, that could be outreach to your interest rate. But conversion metrics really allow you to unblock a lot of things for your team.
I think that's great. I think you're right, that the conversion metrics tell you so much about what's going on, or at least give you the point where you need to start asking those questions, and they can have such a huge impact on all of the other metrics.
Yep.
if someone's offer accepts are low and you can tweak one conversion at the top of funnel, you solve all of your other problems. And so that's a great one. In our last couple of minutes here, I'm gonna move us to kind of our closing thoughts. One thing I always like to ask at the end of these is, what's the big takeaway here? What's the one thing you would want the audience to remember or take back with them from our conversation today? And Jennifer, I'm gonna start with you on this one.
Oh, the one thing I want the audience to take away from today is that performance management is hiring is a team sport. And that leads into performance management and bring accountability. Either put yourself on the hiring panel or hire people that know how to hire for their team. It'll make recruiting a much better function and organization and muscle for the company.
I love that. How about you, Kent? What are your closing thoughts here?
I think for me, the most important thing is to make sure that whatever the goals and metrics that you have in place for the recruiters are very much closely aligned with the strategic priorities for the company. I think that we as leaders, it's incumbent on us to clearly understand what those goals are and clearly articulate it to our teams and ensure that our KPIs and goals are in service of that. It's critically important that the recruiters see a connection between what they do every day and the impact they make with a company's bottom line. And if there's a disconnect there, then it's a problem. I think also it's important for leaders and managers within TA to share their own goals with their team so that their team knows what they're also being held accountable for, so that they can help support that as well.
Awesome. All right, before I get to Camille, I'm going to say thank you very much to Jennifer on behalf of me and the audience. I know she has to pop off a minute or two early here, so thank you, Jennifer. And then Camille, will pop over to you. What are your final thoughts? What do you want to make sure people take away today?
So many thoughts, Nancy. But if I could say anything, I would challenge. I know that talent acquisition is very technology and metrics driven, but I'll say it till I'm blue in the face that people over processes every day. You can get the most out of your recruiters if you're empowering them, if you're encouraging them, if you're connecting to them one-to-one on a personal and professional level. That's how you don't get your team to turn over and be, dissatisfied, even if everything else is burning around you. I'm very much a Ted Lasso leader, and I'm in a circle with my team, and we're rah, and we're putting our hands in and we're getting the job done. So I encourage people to lead like that. Nobody wants to come into an environment and be hammered by paper and metrics and feel like so much stress that they can't do their job. So I really encourage people over processes and to lead in a circle and empower your team to manage their own performance.
Yeah. One thing I learned a while ago that kind of plays in a loop on my brain too, is that process is meant to help people, not get in the way of people, and so it's important that when we're helping our people, when we are kind of creating process, that process is something that actually enables us to accomplish our goals and doesn't necessarily get in the way of that. I was just checking the chat. We had one more kind of lightning round question thrown in here, which I think is fun. It's a little off topic, but I like it anyway. And so I'll ask the two of you, what keeps you in recruiting and what advice would you give a new recruiter? I think the first half of that is a good question, because I think right now, especially what's going on in the talent space, there are a lot of people asking themselves, like, should I stay in recruiting or do I need to make a career shift? So Ken, What do you think? What keeps you in recruiting and what advice would you give?
Goodness, where do I start? I think that, questioning the decision to be in recruiting, I think right now is a natural one. And for those of us that have been through similar cycles like this in the past, I think we've all been there. I reflect back on what companies and leaders say that their greatest asset are their people. And to be in a position that really brings that talent into the company, that is the company's lifeblood, that everyone would agree is the most important part of any company. I think it's just a very fulfilling job. To your point earlier, Recruiting has its ups and downs. It's all guts or glory. But I think when you close that rec with a great hire and the candidates accepted and the hiring managers accepted and the company's just landed a great talent, there's just no better feeling than that. That's what keeps me here.
Amazing. Camille, how about you?
Oh, it's been a long time. I've been through 3 recessions as a recruiter. So, I mean, you really have to have the heart for it. You will get burnt out and you will have those lulls because nobody's going to be riding high their whole career. So you just have to set your expectations, get a mentor. That's super important. And also, you have to know your worth as a recruiter before a company or a manager can tell you your worth, because things are cyclical in this industry. As you can see, there are thousands of recruiters on the street right now, and their metrics don't matter. So they have to know their worth before someone tells them what they're worth, because obviously, you have to build that confidence inside of you to be a recruiter and to weather the storms and the high times.
I think that is a great kind of point to close us on, which is there are a lot of recruiters out on the market right now, and the numbers and the metrics and the performance didn't necessarily lead to where they are right now. It wasn't a factor in it. And so there's only so much we can control. I like your answer, Kent. I remember those moments in my career where a person starts on their first day, and that was the person I sourced and I hired and I closed, and they show up on that first day and they have that look on their face of like, oh my God, I'm so thankful you sent me that email. I'm so thankful you reached out to me. I'm so excited to work here and make this impact. So that feeling is hard to replicate in other parts of a business. All right. Well, with that, in our last minute here, I'm just going to say thank you once again to all of our panelists, Camille, Kent, and Jennifer, who had to head out early. It has been an amazing conversation. Thank you to the audience. The questions here were great. We will send the recording out shortly. And if anyone is a SHRM member, there are SHRM codes available for this. Those will be included in the email as well. But yes, thank you all so much and have a wonderful Thursday. If you're in the Midwest like me, I hope you survived the snowstorm tonight. It's going to be hit or miss. All right. Well, we will see everyone next time. Thank you all.
Good luck out there, folks. Thanks, Nancy.